The optic nerve, I kind of describe it as a HDMI cable, which goes between, say, your Apple TV and your television. So it's the one bringing all the information. So for myself, my eye is perfectly fine, my brain is perfectly fine, but the cabling that sends the vision from the eye to the brain to be interpreted is, for lack of a better word, fucked. Hello and welcome to the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and today I thought we would talk about my own eye condition and how it works, what it is, what can be done about it, if anything, what things are going on. So there's a little bit of genetics and DNA and stuff like that in here, but I'm going to try and make it as interesting as possible to the extent that I even fully understand it myself. But I just thought it'd be worth going into as it's a question that I often get asked, and hopefully it'd be insightful in some way. As always, if you like the show, please consider subscribing on whatever device you have, or sharing, or liking, or following, or whatever it might be in whatever way you can do it, or just telling your friends about it. That really helps. Okay, so what is my specific eye condition? My eye condition is something called Leber's Hereditary Optic Neuropathy. And that means that it's a disease that affects the optic nerve between the eye and the brain. It's called Leber's because the guy who discovered it was some German dude whose last name was Leber. It's hereditary, means it gets passed down. And optic neuropathy means it affects the optic nerve. It appears because of gene mutations, which everybody has. So before I go on, I'm going to have to do a little bit of genetics 101 to the extent that I understand it. But this is the way it was explained to me. So everybody has DNA, and it gets passed down over thousands and millions of years through evolution. And a lot of this DNA is useful and makes us do things and be able to live our life and survive. But there's also quite a bit of DNA that gets passed down, which is kind of junk and not really useful, or might have dormant diseases or conditions in there. So for a lot of people, these genes and gene mutations are just asleep, and it's just part of evolution that over time slight variations happen. Sometimes these variations are beneficial to survival, so they proceed to live on, and other times they're not, and then somebody might die out or whatever it might be, and then that part of the gene mutation might die out for a while until random chance decides to rear its head again, and it might happen again. Some people are born with active genes that aren't very useful. So some people might be born blind, for example, and that might be because of gene mutations. Whereas other people like myself had the gene mutation in their body that didn't activate until I was 12. And that's when it decided to turn on and cause its problems. So literally everybody on Earth has these things. For some people, it might be heart disease or breast cancer or Alzheimer's or whatever it might be. Everybody has this stuff in there, and sometimes it turns on and sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of these genes or gene mutations or this junk DNA can be activated for several reasons. So basically it can be change of life, so a particular part of life, or hormonal changes. Like with me, I was 12, so I was probably just starting puberty, so that's a good candidate for me. You can also have issues around industrial toxins and exposure to things like that can cause this damage to occur or set off these reactions within your body. You can also have severe illness that can mess with you, and that was also something for me that I had to think about, because around about the same time I noticed my vision going was around about the same time I had quite a bad winter virus. And viruses are one of these things that can change your DNA. So that's also another candidate. And also just psychological trauma and things like that. Big emotional changes and upheavals can set off these things in the body. And finally, vitamin deficiencies or malnourishment. They can really affect, because obviously you're not getting the right kinds of energy into your body. So then things that require certain parts of energy or certain nutrients aren't getting it, and then they fall apart or decay. So anyway, that's the quick little genetics lesson. Don't hold me to any of it, but this is the way it was explained to me, and it makes sense, I think. So let's go with that. So with LHON, which is my eye condition, as I said, it's the optic nerve. Now, the optic nerve, I kind of describe it as a HDMI cable, which goes between, say, your Apple TV and your television. So it's the one bringing all the information. So for myself, my eye is perfectly fine. My brain is perfectly fine. But the cabling that sends the vision from the eye to the brain to be interpreted is, for lack of a better word, fucked. So it's decayed or it's unhealthy. Some of the cells may have died because of what's gone on. And that's basically what has happened. So for me, my vision loss, and most people with Leber's or with LHON at least, vision loss kind of starts centrally. So the central part of your vision in one eye typically starts to go a little bit, and then several months later or several weeks later, followed by the second eye in rapid succession. That's the typical experience. So for me, my central vision went for a couple of months, but I was able to see out of the corner of my eyes and through the bottom of my eye. So if I was trying to watch television, or if I wanted to see my friends' faces, instead of looking straight at them, I might turn my head so I can see them to the side, because it was kind of like this blurry patch was in the middle of my eye. So if I could see out of the non-blurry parts of my eye, I was still basically able to see what I needed to see. Or I would look up in the air, so then I'd be able to see through the bottom of my eye what was straight in front of me. Obviously that has its limitations, because the central part of your eye is what you use for focus and depth perception and these things. So when I was playing soccer, for example, I could see the ball, after a while I couldn't see the ball, but when I could see the ball and I was trying to move my head in a certain way that I could keep the ball in sight at all times, it was messing with my ability to be able to judge the distance of the ball or where it might be traveling, its trajectory. So I could see it, but I wasn't really getting the full information of what was happening visually, because that's what the central part of your vision does best. All of this, by the way, is completely painless. So I didn't feel anything. I just noticed that I couldn't see properly, but I never felt anything in my eyes. I never felt pain. I didn't feel like something was diseased or whatever it might be. It's completely painless. So for people who have LHON, it usually affects roughly 2 in 100,000 people. So it's pretty rare. There's only maybe 150,000 people or so in the world who are diagnosed with it. But I will come onto that later, because the diagnosis can be difficult. But also, the majority of the people who get Leber's are men. So men get Leber's 5 times as often as women do. And that means that while the men can suffer with it, because of how it's passed on, thankfully it means that men can't actually pass it on when they have children, because it is passed from the mother. But it does mean that even though the women pass it on, it's the guys who cop it, unfortunately. It also generally tends to present in people, or in men particularly, but also women, but around about the ages of 15 to 35 is when it mostly happens. So teenagers and young adults. So for me, I was 12, so I was a little bit early. It's not unheard of, but I'm kind of on that edge of being quite early to have come down with it. So as I said, it's women who pass it along, and going back into the gene discussion for a moment, basically what happens is it's one of those things that gets passed on through the mitochondria, and you only get the mitochondria from your mother. That's the only part of, like, that's what your mother passes on to you through her eggs, and the mitochondria is part of the cells and your DNA that I'm fairly sure the explanation is it has quite a lot to do with how energy in the cells are produced and how it's distributed and things like that. So the mutation starts to interrupt how that cell generates its energy. And because of that, if certain cells aren't getting the right kinds of energy, or there's a bit of a blink going on there, then susceptible parts of your body can have issues. Now, it just so happens that with Leber's, the susceptible part of your body is the boundary between your retina and your optic nerve, and those cells are quite susceptible to this energy fluctuation or energy loss in the cells. So that's why it affects the optic nerve, and that's why either the nerves in the cells in the optic nerve don't work, or they die, or they're on the blink or on the fritz, for the lack of a better word. I also mentioned about diagnosis. So most people with LHON will be misdiagnosed because it is a rare condition. So a lot of times, like myself and other people I know, will be diagnosed with something much more common, because obviously that's the way doctors think. They don't think it's some 1 in 100,000 or 2 in 100,000 condition. But because of that, a lot of people are misdiagnosed or not diagnosed, and that can take a while to really be across what's actually happening to you. Apparently, in the little bit of research that I did, it can often be diagnosed as the start of multiple sclerosis because it's nerve trouble. So for me, I had to get all my nerves tested just to make sure the eyes weren't the start of something bigger. Thankfully for me, touch wood, that's not what it was. But, I had to get a lumbar puncture to check my spinal fluids and my spinal cord to make sure everything was okay. I had to get this other test. I think it's called an EMG. Basically, they put needles into your muscles and leave them there, and then they send an electric shock through them to see if your muscles and your nerves are behaving the right way. It's horrible. Thankfully, they put me to sleep after the first couple of shocks because it was pretty bad. But that's the testing, because they're trying to make sure that there isn't something wider going on with your nerves, because obviously you need nerves for everything. The other problem with diagnosis and the trouble with diagnosis is that there are parts, or there are different strains of Leber's that are more detectable than others. So when I first started losing my vision when I was 12, which was 2002, at the time they could only test for 4 strains of Leber's at the time. But they knew that there were more, but they could only get a positive test for 4 of those strains. So they did the tests on me and they never got a positive diagnosis. But they basically said that through a process of elimination and all the signs that my optic nerve was showing, that this is all that it could be, and that it was likely a strain of Leber's that wasn't detectable and couldn't be tested for in DNA. Now, it's my understanding 18 years later that there are more strains. I think there's maybe 10 or 11 now that can be tested for. I haven't bothered to do the testing because it doesn't really change anything. I've kind of made my peace with it, and there's no strains currently that can be fixed. So it would really just be knowing for knowing's sake, which some people choose to do. I haven't. I'm actually currently, for other reasons, going through the process of being tested again doing some genetic testing for some other reasons, and I've asked them if they can just do the whole shebang again to see if anything will come up now, because if I'm going to do it for one thing, I may as well incorporate the other into it. So we'll see if something comes back. So it would be weird if I had been operating for 18 years under the impression I had Leber's optic neuropathy and then to find out I don't. So I don't know what that might mean, and this episode might become irrelevant if that's the case, but I guess I'm hoping that's what it'll come back as, and it's not something else, because I don't really think there's a chance that if it's something else, it's going to be something that can be done anything about. So I guess it's always the hope that it's not something else that might have other negatives to it that I was previously unaware of. So that remains to be seen. And finally, I thought I would talk about some of the different research methods that are underway to try and either help or cure or fix people who have Leber's. And again, I'm not exactly across all of the ins and outs of these things, but this is my understanding of how they work, because it is uncurable at the moment, but there are essentially three main avenues that are being worked on. So the first is gene therapy. Now, my understanding with gene therapy is that what they are basically trying to do is convince the problematic genes to change or turn off the problem or to behave in the right way so that the mitochondria and the energy to the cells starts running its normal course. That's my understanding of how that works. So it's basically trying to get the genes that are misfiring or doing the wrong things or that are turned on to behave the healthy, normal way, and in the hope that then that might be able to repair. The body will naturally try and repair what it can because the information and the coding in your DNA has changed, and will basically run a recovery program like on a computer to fix the virus, for the lack of a better word. The other thing that they're looking into is stem cells. So my understanding of the way stem cells works is that stem cells are a kind of cell that can be either encoded or that will naturally take on the form of the cells that are around them. So I believe the idea is that if the stem cells were introduced to the optic nerve, that the stem cells would then turn into optic nerve cells, and that they would either replace or repair the damaged cells, and then that shoddy cabling might work a little bit better. That's my understanding of how the stem cells works. The third is a bionic eye. Now, when people hear bionic eye, they're probably thinking of, I don't know, Mad Eye Moody in the Harry Potter movies, where he has some eye that's kind of going zzz, zzz as it moves around. So that's not how it works. Basically, the bionic eye is trying to bypass the damaged or problem area. So in my case, it would be the optic nerve, so that technology can replace what the biology isn't doing correctly. So my understanding with the bionic eye is that somebody might wear essentially kind of like digital glasses. So they're glasses that have pixels in them and they're digital lenses. And those glasses obviously see what's in front of you. And then that information is relayed to a chip on your brain, I believe, that is implanted onto your visual cortex, which is the part of your brain that basically deciphers what it is your eyes are seeing, and then will allow you to see what the glasses are actually seeing. So obviously that means it's bypassing the damaged area. Now, my understanding is that they've done this for the retina and different parts of the eyeball itself, but they haven't managed to be able to do this yet for damage to the optic nerve. But that's basically how it works. It's trying to use technology to bypass the damaged biological tissue. But obviously then you have that thing of the brain needs to be able to understand. So you have to try and work out a way to be able to teach the brain to know what it's seeing. And that can have its issues because somebody who's never seen, for example, has never had a fully awakened visual cortex that has learned how to process. So it's a lot harder for people who have never seen to see again if technology like this works, because basically it's kind of like that part of their brain, the hardware has never really worked, or it's never really been calibrated in the right way. But for somebody like myself, the hope would be that the brain remembers what it was like to see, because I did for 12 years. As I said in other episodes, I can still dream in full sight. So my brain still knows how to interpret vision. It's just dealing with the cabling with that HDMI, as I said, between the eye and the brain to get the visual information coming in. So that's my understanding of how the genes and the mutations and all of that works. And I hope that was interesting and understandable. I've tried to make it as easy and create analogies that are as easy to understand as possible. So yeah, I hope that was interesting and educational. As always, you can get in touch with the show by emailing blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram if you search for Blindseye Podcast. I'm on Twitter @BlindseyePod. And if you want one place to go to, I just have a website, which is blindseyepodcast.com. So I have a blog on there, all the old episodes, different ways of getting in contact with me, all my social media, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I will be back to speak to you next week. Cheers.